Drake's muscles strained as he hauled his chin above the pipe held aloft by two security droids. He slowly lowered himself, gritting his teeth as his biceps burnt from exertion. He pulled his chin over the bar and grunted. 29. He lowered himself and, muscles protesting, lifted his chin over the bar one last time, before straightening his legs and letting go of the bar. Breathing heavily, he made a bent-armed, winged-like motion to work some of the soreness from his arms and shoulders. The new cotton pants and shirt he'd changed into already soaked in sweat from his workout. He looked up to the sky and the sun that sat like a fat beetle on a glass dome above him. Wiping the sweat from his forehead, he stated, X-30, X-29, return to patrol. The pipe was stabbed deep in the ground as the two droids clomped away, returning to their patrol route along the mansion's perimeter. Drake wandered back into the mansion, pulling his shirt off and lobbing it onto the face of a haughty-looking Geknosian statue. Pale scar tissue covered his torso in dots, lines, shallow grooves, and in some spots pink divots. He made his way to the mansion's massive kitchen, following the sweet smell of roasting meat. After a few minutes of getting lost, Drake found the ornate flapper doors to the kitchen and pushed his way through. Kaz hummed softly to herself as she basted a slab of meat with its own rendered fat. She wore an apron over a similar, simple cotton outfit to his, a rag keeping her hair out of her face. Drake slipped past her to the big metal box that kept the stuff inside it cold. He wrenched the door open, grabbing a fresh loaf of dark bread from the small shelf filled with pristine white loaves that were too light for his tastes, a block of orange-colored cheese, and some slices of salted ham. He quietly sliced a few thin squares of cheese and a couple of thick slices of dark bread, letting the salted ham soak in a bowl of water to soften it up. Plopping down 2 slices of bread, he set a slice of cheese on each before pulling the ham from the bowl of water and patting it dry with a towel. Finally, he set the slightly softened ham on one of the slices of bread and plopped the other slice onto it, cheese down. He tore a bite away, chewing the tough, salty meat as he wandered out of the kitchen, the coarse, dense, and dry brown bread drying his mouth out slightly as the cheap cheese coated his tongue with its strong, sharp flavor. This had been his breakfast, lunch, and dinner back in the village, along with a couple glasses of dirty water that he'd collect from his rain barrel. He found himself staring down at a sandwich, tears blurring his vision. Slowly, he wiped them away, taking a seat in a plush chair that had been left in the hallway. He groaned frustratedly as he sank into the cushions, a deep sense of wrongness in his gut. He stood, and with a grunt of frustration, ripped the padding off the chair, leaving bare wood that he eased himself onto, finally able to relax somewhat as he tore a second bite out of his sandwich. Chewing slowly, he reminisced. Tending the fields was back-breaking labor, but there was no better work to him. Simply guiding the groks to plow the fields with the first signs of spring, having it planted by the first rain. He missed when the only weapons he needed was his body and a sharp scythe for harvest time. He let his head fall back, tears dripping their way down his face as he finally let himself grieve. He missed Mr. 47. The bald baker that would give him fresh loaves for a single standard credit. He lamented Mrs. 110, the old motherly woman who ran the butcher's shop. She'd always set aside a slab of salted pork for him so he could eat when he came home from the fields. He cried for the Bee family, who owned a small number of dairy groks, and would bring him cheese and butter every week. And then he finally let himself remember why they showed him kindness. The whip cracked as it wrapped around his forearm, splitting the skin as he grabbed the whip's cord, staring at the high priest, Mrs. B's little girl tied to the town's whipping stump behind him. It was me. I stole the cheese from the storehouse. She had nothing to do with it. The high priest simply snarled and gestured for his soldiers to grab Drake's arms. As the whip cracked down for the first time, Drake gritted his teeth, refusing to make a sound. Scream! Beg for mercy! He'd heard the high priest shout, but Drake kept his mouth clamped shut, the whip cracking down again and again for hours, the high priest switching off with his guards when he got tired. By the time they stopped, Drake's back had been flayed to the point you could see the pinkish white of his ribs, and yet he'd never made a sound, refusing to let them win. As the high priest stomped away, Drake shakily got to his feet. He began to stumble towards home to sleep it off. Suddenly, the ground was rushing up towards him as he tripped on his own feet. A Clawville woman caught him, supporting his weight with her slim frame, as she looked at him with tears of concern in her eyes. He remembered lifting his head and looking out at the stunned faces of the villagers. Slowly, he mustered an encouraging smile from Mrs. B's daughter, who was staring at him with red, puffy eyes. Yeah, she had stolen the cheese, but her family would have starved otherwise. Drake was happy to take a beating for them. They had it hard enough already. Drake slowly tore away another bite of his sandwich. It tasted like bliss, like a simpler time, a time when those he'd loved still walked the same earth he did, when brown bread, cheddar cheese, and salted ham was a daily delicacy. Looking down at his sandwich, he closed his eyes and bowed his head. For you, I will never stop fighting. For you, I will never stop struggling. For I owe you my whole life and my last breath. For you. Drake opened his eyes, staring at a portrait of the monarch that sat in a small recess in the wall. For you, the ones that gave me purpose, bandaged my weeping wounds and fed my starving stomach. I will win. The coffee pot on the corner of the desk gurgled as Drake pored over the maps of Golgotha the merchant had kept in his office. Warehouses and markets were highlighted in various colors corresponding to the goods they sold. Drake was focusing on the ones marked in blue. They were slave markets and holding areas. Using a pen stolen from the merchant's desk, Drake noted down street addresses and supposed head counts on a piece of scratch paper. Maddeningly, every market and warehouse listed was listed as being on high alert. If the merchant's business receipts were correct, that not only meant they'd been sold security droids, but that there were also mercenaries to contend with. If not Mago's ilk, then similar. With a heavy sigh, Drake picked up his tin cup and slurped down a mouthful of cold, bitter coffee. He was trying to figure out what their next move was. Attacking a market or warehouse was out of the question at the moment. Drake shifted his attention to the lone building labeled with white. The solitary, multi-story tower was labeled GNN Broadcasting. There were no notes as to its alert level, but the name itself caught Drake's attention. Geknosion News Network. Drake mumbled softly, circling the building and tapping it softly with the tip of the pen. Drake quickly pulled the drawer he'd gotten the maps from open and began combing through the other documents. Blueprints, receipts, contracts, and bills were all jumbled together in the large drawer. But eventually, Drake found what he was looking for. Grabbing the GNN building's blueprints, he bolted out of the office door and made a beeline for the room with the felt-top table. He burst through the doors, startling the other four into looking up from their plates. Kaz, Remen, Cassius, and Destier looked up at him with expressions of surprise. Remen had paused with a small handful of shredded meat halfway to his open mouth. Drake waved a hand for them to continue as he marched over to the table and spread the blueprints out on top. Weighing the corners down with some spare boxes of ammunition that had been laying on the table, he waited for them to finish eating. It took a few minutes, but one by one they all joined him in looking over the blueprints. Destier was the first to speak. Drake, what are we looking at? Drake snapped his fingers and pointed at Destier. Good question. This is the floor plan to the local news network's broadcasting center. Drake paused, letting that information sink in as looks of realization dawned on their faces. With a sharp nod, he tapped a room labeled Signal and Control on the blueprints. It's time for us to go public with our mission. General Goom sat back in the foldable metal chair, cracking open a can of carbonated water and fruit syrup as he looked upon his magnum opus. The droid stood head and shoulders above him, massive power conduits plugging into its new reactor fed it with power. He looked up at the hatch in its main body. There were too many new weapons and advanced systems for a simple AI to run it, so he opted for biological integration. All he needed was a parasite that he could seal inside as the driving unit. It would be a painful, messy process, but, by his calculations, he was looking at a 600% combat effectiveness increase. He leaned back and closed his eyes, Hopefully Gomon wouldn't find out about his previous mishap, or overlook it once he saw Goom's new toy. Goom slowly closed his eyes to rest, blissfully unaware of the storm coming his way.